If you've not listened to the previous recording, I'm here to fill you in on what was discovered. As a few of you may know, there was a series of documents discovered from affairs that happened in Cleveland, Tennessee. These documents were studied amongst our colleagues at the Institute of Supernatural Affairs. We were preparing our notes for our annual presentation, as we have done in the past, and when we went to grab these documents, we found that they were missing. We don't know how, we don't know why. All we know is that when we went to grab these documents from our study, there was it's all just so much that just happened, what with the contents of these documents and just them disappearing. Sorry. When we went to our study, it was peculiar because the documents were gone, but there was this black liquid all throughout the room, along with a really substantial amount of wool. An odd thing to be in there. And since this was the only evidence found, it was inconclusive to give us a lead on where our documents went. Just please keep in mind that these documents have very, very startling material within them. We made an audiobook, and it's one of the best ways that we can get this information across. We have attempted now to restore life to these strange documents to the best of our ability using our notes that we took on them, because luckily those didn't disappear. This is part 2 of 3 of the Cleveland horrors. If you missed the first part, without delay, I will give you the gist of what happened. There was a man named Gerald who lived in Cleveland around the time of the start of the 20th century. Sorry, everything's just, my head's spinning. He found himself grappling with the dire misfortune of having a lover that was dying. Her name was Susan. He ended up watching her perish. He could not live with life without her. He found himself in the midst of a traveler from out of town one day, and this man had claimed to be able to resurrect the dead. Gerald was put off from this notion. He didn't want to let some mysterious man, as with anybody. You want some mysterious man to resurrect your wife? Sounds too good to be true. But he eventually gave into this deep ache within himself. He allowed this man to perform his dark arcane talents. During this process, Gerald's only son was removed from the house in order to keep his son in the dark about the sinister acts that were taking place. Gerald dug up the body of his dead wife and brought her back to revival. When this man took her body and brought her back, it wasn't Susan. Susan was no longer in control of her mind, of her body. This thing that inhabited Susan's body then killed the man that brought her back to life. It then turned to kill Gerald as well, but something stopped her. She then quickly whisked off into the night, leaving behind a startled, traumatized Gerald. Overwhelmed by this tragedy, he quickly resorted to taking his own life out by the Ocoee River, leaving only Henry, his only child, in a state of everlasting confusion about the entire occurrence. Please, I ask of you, please listen carefully and dutifully to part 2. Please share these stories to as many people as you can and to the best of your ability.
The sickness is seeping through the streets. It's coursing its way into everyone. The cycle just repeats.
The Cleveland Horrors Part 2, The Forgotten Tales. He was making his runs around town. It was midday. He had one more stop before he was done for the day. Cleveland was not that large. It didn't take much time to hit all the stops along Inman Street. John was a postman for the local papers. It was the way everyone knew what local events were happening, deals at the general store and whatnot. Cleveland took a lot of pride in their short story section. They would print them all over Chattanooga. John had a moment during his lunch break to check out what today's section was about. In today's section, it was not fiction, however. It was detailing all of the missing bodies, all of the dead animals that were being found across town. There were up to 5 missing people and over a dozen livestock. John set the paper down. He had heard a brief conversation about this in passing. He had figured they would come back. Maybe people were just getting paranoid. But the description of the cows startled him. It sounded extremely gory. He attempted to rid himself of these sinister thoughts. He was about a block away from his last stop. It was just up the road from the Tradfords' abandoned house. That place always gave him the creeps. Ever since Henry's dad's passing, no one dared to move in. Before much of the inside had been excavated, there had been a lot of unexplainable things found inside, leaving no answers to what happened there. The place had really gone to ruin now. The roof sagged in and there were multiple holes in the wall. It also strangely seemed to be cast in a slight perpetual shadow. The large front window had been shattered shortly after Henry's passing. No one could really figure out why. He had heard rumors that Gerald had been doing witchcraft inside. That didn't seem likely to him, but either way, the place freaked him out. As he passed it, he paused. He thought he saw a figure lurking inside.
John, I can see you through the window. You have to see this. Come in, but be quiet.
A girl softly spoke through the darkened window. He recognized it to be Sally. He couldn't believe she was in that place. He had grown very fond of her over the last year and was waiting to have the courage to say something.
Is that you, Sally? What are you doing in there?
Just come in, John. Hurry. I need you to see this.
John hesitated. His skin crawled at the thought of going in that place. But it was Sally. He had waited so long to approach her. He went for the door without a second guess. As he went for the handle, he saw a spider the size of his hand scurry off the hinge. He recoiled, got his composure, and grabbed the knob. The door creaked open. It was almost pitch black inside. The whole interior was coated in cobwebs.
Sally? Where are you?
Shut the door. I'm right around the corner. Be very quiet.
He shut the door and lit a match. What he saw caused him to slam against the door, almost putting out the match. The figure in front of him was a woman, but she was very tall and thin as a feather. Her drooping hair coated the whole front side of her face. She smelled rancid, most likely attributable to the black ooze soaking the ground around her. He screamed. She quickly approached, putting a hand to his mouth. The match went out.
Oh, John. No need to scream. I just need you for something. I'm glad you came in.
The woman said in a completely different voice. It almost sounded like 2 voices.
I don't see a lot of people, you see. I seek interaction. I need it just like you, John. People get afraid of me, though. They don't like that I'm different.
She said. She began to caress his face with her other hand.
Ah, yes. You are a handsome lad. It feels so good to touch another creature. I'm going to let go of you, but I agree with your friend Sally. You need to be quiet, okay?
She said, slowly releasing her hand. John just stood against the door, completely paralyzed. This woman was extremely strong. He didn't think he could run.
Where's Sally? What have you done to her?
John managed to get out, a tear forming in his right eye.
Oh, she's not in here, silly. Don't you worry. Light a match, John. All that I ask is that you read me the paper. You see, I once lived here. I would read the paper every morning. Unfortunately, they cut off the spot on the route because, well, they don't care about me anymore, John. So please, take a seat. Read me the paper.
She said as she brought a chair forward in the darkness. John reached for his matches, shaking. He broke one, and then finally got one going. A small bit of the room came into light, and the creature in front of John manifested itself. He realized that she was not human. There was no life in her body. He felt his knees begin to give out.
I have to go.
He said, reaching for the door.
Read the paper, John.
She yelled this time in multiple registers. He gave up. This was his safest bet. He made his way to the chair as she lit up a few candles. She then stood just above him to the right, hovering over him, dropping black ooze all over his arm.
Do you see that disorderly corner? Over there, John. That was my birthing chamber. You all brought me here. And now you act as if you don't want me here? That just doesn't make any sense. Read me the paper, John.
John read a few different sections before she interrupted.
Is there anything about the missing bodies?
He hesitated and then began reading the section about the deaths. When he was finished, she bent down and whispered in his ear.
Do you feel it is beginning? Slowly, and then all at once. That will be this whole town.
She giggled softly.
The awakening will now proceed.
John was found later in the Hedford's house, his pants torn to shreds, limbs torn off his body, covered in black ooze. Chapter 1. The Camel That Broke the Nail's Back. Henry moved the cart full of sheepskins through the large door on the south side of the building. He was on autopilot. After doing the same jobs day after day, it turned him into some sort of robot. Henry was well aware of this. Even though automation was a fever dream of the future, he often found himself thinking about civilizations of the past, marveling over recent engineering feats, or daydreaming about the future. Oh, the future. In his mind, it would seem more real than daily life. However, it would be shaded in some veneer of impossibility. He learned to hack this automated process and learned to just shut off during work hours, allowing him to push himself harder than anyone. He arrived at the hanging room through a small wooden door along the right side of the factory. He made his way into the open space and found the old ladder he had used many times. I wonder what surprise will happen today, he thought sarcastically. He placed the wheelbarrow on the right of the ladder and gazed up. Noticing how much higher the drying line was strung, he exclaimed,
"Who moved the darn line so high?"
This was met, of course, by blank stares. Was it just some dumb prank or an actual mistake? He wondered. Either way, the task still remained, so he mounted the ladder and carried his first sheepskin up to the line. It was much tougher than usual, as he had to stand on the second-to-last ladder step and stretch the sheepskin up and attach it to the rope. A few times he felt a little wobbly, but after a while he got used to it. He was about 3/4 of the way through when something startled him entirely. There seemed to be a figure glaring down from the ceiling. The figure was naked. Her limbs seemed to be attached to the ceiling with some sort of black substance. Its dark brown hair poured downwards from their face. The most disturbing thing, however, were the eyes. They seemed to be oozing that black liquid, the same as what attached it to the ceiling. He recoiled at the sight, causing the ladder to teeter-totter to the left. He tried to counterbalance by leaning back to the right, which caused the ladder to tumble too far. He couldn't recover this time. As the sheepskin weighed on his chest, it sealed his fate. He knew he was going down hard, although he couldn't see his descent. His eyes were fixed trancidly on the strange manifestation above him. It seemed to smirk at him. He distinctly felt some black filament splatter on his face as he descended. Right before the world went black, he thought he almost heard words in the back of his mind. The awakening will now proceed. It felt like a good while of nothingness, and then he heard a multitude of voices. He attempted to wake up, but couldn't seem to move or open his eyes. He could sense people gathering around him. He almost felt suspended in a distant place, far from the scene. Then the pain kicked in. In the distance, he could feel sharp pangs ripple through his left shoulder, while simultaneously the back of his head sent its own painful signals.
That was a bad fall. Henry, can you hear me?
Jimmy, your average Clevelandite, asked him. Henry could not respond. They all got a bit more nervous.
Well, he's got a pulse, luckily.
Lee, the manager of the mill, said.
Has anybody heard if Jamie's back in town?
A couple responses confirmed that he was.
All right, let's get him over there quick. That was quite the fall. Jimmy, James, ride him over. Take the rest of the day off. It doesn't matter. Just make sure that Jamie has everything he needs. And the rest of you just go back to work. Show's over.
Henry was then laid on a makeshift stretcher and escorted out to the cart in the rear of the building. Despite the short distance, the ride over to Jamie's was absolutely excruciating. Every bump sent painful ripples through the trenches of Henry's mind. After some time, Henry felt his distant body still. The two men came around back and started leveraging Henry out of the cart.
Jamie! You home, Jamie?
James yelled. The door screeched open and a middle-aged man with a bent frame and intelligent, calm eyes looked out.
What happened?
Jamie asked, quickly turning into an analytical machine.
He fell from about 20 feet. He landed pretty hard on his head. We couldn't get a response. He only was intermittently flinching. He looked like he was in a daze.
Jamie looked Henry in the eyes for a moment.
Anything else I should know? Or does Jimmy speak true?
He asked. Jimmy gave him the rundown, explained how he had fallen off the ladder, how he had landed. As Jamie listened, he began assessing the damage.
Yep, fractured humerus, significant head trauma. With that fall on the head, we're lucky he still has a pulse. I'm going to start a morphine drip and work on reducing that shoulder. Hang tight, Henry. Stay with us, boy.
The next time Henry came to consciousness, he was no longer in the mill. He looked at his surroundings to try to take in the scene. It was a dark night in Cleveland. A few lanterns on front porches illuminated the dancing shadows of nearby trees. You could hear every branch dance as the wind rustled them back and forth. The crescent moon illuminated the long grass pastures, the grass swaying to a hidden melody. Walking up the dirt road, a figure walked lonesomely. As it neared, the grass warped around it, morphing mesmerizingly. In the dim moonlight, he almost thought he saw something dripping off of the figure as it walked. The same black, viscous liquid that coated the figure in the mill. In his slumbered state, Henry began to realize that the figure was approaching him. As it got closer, for some reason, he could not find himself able to move.
Henry? My boy. It's been far too long. My sweet, sweet boy.
Henry welled inside. How could this be? He thought to himself. His heart broke through his apprehension. Right as he was about to speak, the figure stopped, turned around, looking startled, the moon casting her backdrop upon the road.
Soon, my boy, we will speak openly. Be careful, you are not safe here. I will explain everything I can, but I need time. It's not safe for us to speak.
She darted off. The scene faded. Henry's awareness also faded. Chapter 2 Merrily, Merrily, Life is But a Dream. Shelley got on her horse. She had tended these fields since she was a kid. It was usually the same exact routine. Set up the hay troughs, get the cattle into the second pasture at dusk, occasionally check on them, bring them back in at dawn, pass out. But occasionally it would become hard to manage when only one person was working them. The night shift was the easiest job in the world until it wasn't. Some of the cattle had wandered off and they needed to be fetched. Something had scared them off, which was strange because they had just been moved into the feeding pasture. It was a rare occasion that they would all leave. She started walking towards the first fence. Something immediately got her attention. The gate was not only open, it was ripped apart. The whole right side was dangling half attached. She slowed her pace, let it go. She had to find the cattle quickly. Henry came back into awareness. He was no longer in his body. He no longer had control. He was peering from a higher vantage point than that of his own. The body he was looking from was holding branches out of his line of sight. He noticed the arms were covered in fur. He was staring through a series of bushes into an open pasture. A woman was on a horse. She was looking his way. He didn't have much time to theorize what this alien experience was. He was still caught in a whirlwind of sinister sensations. He felt a strange series of emotions arise within him. At first it was a sense of nakedness, an urge to hide, to scurry away. And then quickly that was replaced by bloodlust, the need to kill. He was fighting to understand what this creature he was inhabiting was thinking, but he could not seem to pierce that veil. All that he felt was a surging mixture of fear and survival, like somehow that creature in the pasture was a threat to his mere existence. Shelley started to see a commotion in the back field. As she found her way about halfway out, she saw a few scattered piles of blood. There were not many predators in this area, so naturally, she assumed the worst. She unsheathed her rifle and continued back, slowly now. She heard breathing and moaning. A heifer laid supine with both of its back legs at 90-degree angles. Its front right leg was torn off. Its large guts were hanging out, soaking the ground around it. It was quickly dying. She was entirely unnerved because she had no idea what on earth could have caused this much damage. She got off the horse, keeping the reins in her hand, and walked up to the animal.
"You poor thing,"
she uttered. She scanned the area. Nothing seemed to be close. She pulled her rifle to its forehead and pulled the trigger. Immediately, she heard a roar in the distance. She pulled her rifle up. It sounded like a belching chimpanzee, but in a deathly low tone. She moved her rifle side to side. There were multiple now. She saw a rustling in the bushes to the right. In a state of survival, she ran back and started getting on her horse. As she was swinging her left leg over, she felt something on her torso. Before she knew it, she was thrown onto her back. Her horse bucked off into the distance. The last thing she saw were two creatures. All she could see before she disappeared were the arms, the dreadfully long arms, 2 times their bodies, and the eyes, the blood-red glowing eyes. Shelley was never seen again. No evidence was found. Henry came to consciousness once again. He was now back in his body. He was back in the mill. People were going about their jobs, taking the sheepskins to dry, bringing them into the back rooms to be processed, etc. He walked around. The room had a somewhat crimson appearance. He thought that was odd. He was trying to figure out what was happening to him. It felt like he was just waking up and desperately trying to remember a dream. He saw his friend James. He walked up to him excitedly.
Do they pay you to look pretty and do nothing?
He joked. James fidgeted, looking around his back. James turned the other way and continued trimming the sheepskin. He looked on edge. Henry looked around the room. He tried speaking to Lee, who seemed to just peer straight through him.
Man, I can't believe Henry fell like that. I mean, I know I give him a hard time, but he doesn't usually make those kinds of mistakes. I wonder if he's going to make it.
I'm going to be really disheartened if he doesn't pull through.
James replied. Henry recalled what had taken place. He felt like he was about to cry, and then he got it together. As he got a grasp on the situation, he realized that he was still asleep. He glanced up at the spot where he fell. Instantly, his head began throbbing. He continued painfully peering. The ceiling where he tried to hang the sheepskin took on a red circular shape. He tried to make sense of it. He realized he was looking at the moon, a very red, darkened blood moon warping through the ceiling. He tried to remember what had happened on the fall, why he had fallen. He recalled the distorted figure, the black ooze. His heart dropped. It had looked like Susan, a devilish contortion of his mom. His skin crawled. What he had witnessed on the ceiling was an abomination. He couldn't grasp what implications that might have.
I'm so glad you're okay, Henry. That was such a fall.
He heard his mother's loving voice reverberate through the mill, quelling all other noises. He still could not see her anywhere.
Is that really you, Mom? Where are you?
He asked.
This is where I always am now, Henry.
She stopped herself, not wanting him to see her.
Something went terribly wrong, Henry. Just know that it wasn't your father's fault. He loved me. And Henry, you know I always loved you.
She replied. Henry paused, a tear welling in his left eye. In the middle of this industrious building, no one seemed to notice anything.
Mom, what did he do? He never told me anything. He just became so strange and distant after you died. I had no one.
Henry desperately said.
I don't even know where to begin, Henry. I just want to make these interactions count. I don't know how much longer we have. I need you to listen to me very carefully. What matters is your life. There are devilish things happening, but I will make sure to get you out of here alive. You need more rest, and I need more time to think. I love you, son. Get some more sleep.
He was left alone in the room full of people, all just having another Cleveland day. The crimson moon illuminated the scene sinisterly, and then once again his awareness faded. Henry awakened once more, not to any random scenes of violence or utter confusion, but this time it was very clear. He was staring at himself. Seeing himself lie there from out of his body was a very strange experience. Was he dead? Was this what the afterlife was? He was in a rundown room that he recognized to be that of Dr. Jamie Burroughs. He saw the racks of handmade potions. He saw the cluttered desks, scattered with vials and stencils and such. It was a dimly lit night, the window cloth fluttering in the wind, bringing a smooth breeze inside. He was both a bit reassured and startled to realize that he was feeling these sensations. He realized he had no body, but merely a floating perspective on the scene. He also realized everything took on a slightly blurred and bluish hue. This whole experience was utterly alien. He saw the various tubes coming into his mouth wide open. He almost felt the dryness of his tongue. He tried to will himself to wake up to no avail. He assumed he was deep within a coma. But then, what the hell were those visions he had been experiencing? They had seemed so deathly real. He started wondering how he could wake up, but then he remembered his encounter with his mom. Was that just some delusion state, or was she truly in this strange realm with him? As these thoughts dominated his mind, he saw Jamie walk into the room. Henry and others had noticed that Jamie had become a bit strange the last few years. He still handled his patients, but something about him had changed, almost darkened. That was very reflective in this instance. He looked very exhausted, almost frightened, but too tired to actually show these emotions. He also noticed there was a strange warping of the room around him. He quickly made the association. It was once again that disgusting black ooze, spilling behind his feet, coating the walls as he walked. He wondered if that was even apparent in the real world. He felt afraid as Jamie stepped closer to examine him. He recoiled within himself.
So, what are we going to do with you, Hedford? Your family just won't leave this town alone, will it?
Jamie stepped aside and began dragging a machine closer to Henry. It was an IV machine loaded with what appeared to be that same devilish black ooze. He strained his eyes in an attempt to pierce the veil between dream and reality. He could not get a clear grasp on what he was looking at.
Well, let's set you right, Henry. May God be with you.
He injected the needle. Chapter 3, A Tale of Lust and Terror. She was waiting on the corner of Lowry Street and Benton Pike for what felt like an eternity. Evangelina, or Lena, as most called her, was a 27-year-old woman from Mexico. She was a very beautiful Latina with long flowing black hair and wandering eyes. She wondered if he was ever going to actually show up, or if this was just an elaborate ruse. She had left her place as the sun was taking its final peaks across the dreary town. She had lit her lantern and snuck through the back roads, down Inman, occasionally making her own trail. She had done her best to stay unnoticed. Being sly was an unfortunate skill she had acquired, trying to avoid people as she made her way across the states. It was just easier that way. The likelihood of conflict arising for people seeing someone of her kind was high, and she rather not be bothered with the drama. She thought briefly about where she would have been if she had never made the choice to come to America. She would still be in the heart of Mexico City, roughing it, dodging bullets, but still, maybe she would have been happy. In a series of seemingly divine steps, she had left the country during the Revolution. It was a necessary step forward with the disarray her family had found itself in. Still, she often regretted it all. It was tough not being able to contact family, being stuck in her own little demented universe. She was through with it. Tonight will be the last of all that. It's time I make my own decisions, she thought to herself. Her thought stream was interrupted by a figure approaching from the dim roadside. He approached, whistling a soft, soothing tune. His hood shadowed his eyes, his lantern illuminated his toned body. All of these thoughts vanished. She was overwhelmed by excitement, fantasizing about the evening ahead. She was finally doing it. "There's my fair lady. Sorry for my tardiness," he said in his slightly foreign voice. His accent sounded as if it was holding on to the remnants of his European past, unsure of whether to let go entirely. They made their way deeper into the woods.
So, you never really told me about yourself. All that I've heard is how strange everyone thought you were growing up.
She said, giggling a bit. He grabbed her by the small of the waist and ushered her forward with a sly grin. A world estranged from itself will make any sensible man seem crazy. The American enterprise, despite its noble foundation, has lost a bit of its identity. But mostly, yes, I was just a very weird kid. He said. They both laughed.
I think we might have gotten along. I was always a defiant kid. That's kind of why I was the one that came to America.
You wanted to defy your family by not telling them about your escape into the States. You thought it was the only way to make it actually happen.
Wow, aren't you intuitive? Yes, you are right, and it was going well at first, but turns out I made a terrible mistake. I wish I could do it all over.
They approached the horses they had tied up earlier in the day. Let's get to riding, sweetheart. It's a long way to Chilhowie.
Well, you're in luck. Robert is not in town for another 2 days.
Oh, love, you won't ever have to worry about Robert again. That I can assure you of. She had never been to Benton Falls before, but she had heard lots of things. It was a place that only a few people knew about. Well, up until recent controversy. It was just a short jaunt from Chilhowie, just a bit difficult to locate. Those that had been said it had an air of magic and majesty to it. It was a quiet location with a wonderful waterfall, she had been told.
I have to say, I was a little put off when you chose this location to take me out to.
He looked at her for a moment and then said, You don't believe those stories, do you? I was reading it in the paper a few days ago. Not sure what to make of it. It's a damn shame, of course. But it's also a shame more people are learning the spot. He was trying to lighten the mood, it seemed.
Oh, I don't believe the stories, and if it's true, well, I guess we are investigating for the community.
They both laughed softly. It seemed they had both developed a dark sense of humor throughout the years. What do you think happened anyways? They claimed 2 women went missing around this area.
Well, coming from someone who has made many silent escapes, it doesn't seem impossible that they just left town. All they are basing it off of was that Benton was their last sighting. Some hunters saw them around here. Sounded like he was unclear what he really saw.
Even as she said this, she felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement rise up her spine. They had now gotten a sizable way away from town. It did feel strange out here. It was almost eerily quiet, but yet so alive, she thought to herself. She was just happy to be feeling something at all. Anything was better than the last 7 years of her life. She was here for it. Henry came to once again. He was getting used to the routine at this point. This time he was in the mountains somewhere. He identified that he was in the same body by a deep gouge gained in that gruesome act with the cattle. He felt his body freeze within himself. The ape shrugged it off, apparently unaware of his captive co-pilot. Henry began to wonder if all of these creatures shared consciousness to some level. If he was able to tap into this perspective, what made them not be able to do the same? He tried to shake off the images burned into his mind. It was the most disturbing thing he had ever witnessed. Not only just seeing the cows torn apart, watching that cattle hand be dismembered, but seeing it from a first-person perspective. That was extremely disturbing. It was hard to not feel like he played a part. He shook these thoughts off and tried to focus on what was happening. Ever since making contact with his mom, he was running on adrenaline alone. He had found some sort of purpose here in this demented realm. Given everything that had happened, he felt he was more present than ever. He wished he could strangle this creature out with his mind, but he knew it was no use. He would find a way to kill them all, given the chance. He noticed the ape was crawling to a vantage point, a large rock face overlooking the valley. He saw the bending turns of the ridge lines careening towards Cleveland. Yes, he was up very high. He recognized this spot as his mind turned into a reel of associations. Things were starting to make sense. His skin boiled inside this creature. His hatred for these beings grew. Lena was beginning to think they would never get there when Arthur finally said, "You will miss it in the daytime if your eyes stray for a moment. Right this way." They made their way left off the road. The overbrush began to kill off the moonlight quickly. Their lanterns lit the surroundings dimly. "It's about a mile up the way and we will be there, Lena. And then finally I will be able to explore that exotic body," he said with a grin. She felt butterflies drop into the depths of her stomach. This man really knew how to call the shots, and she felt like she would give in to any of his commands. She began to second-guess herself. She felt like she needed some reassurance.
So what is it about this place that you are so fond of?
Well, during the day, it has the best view of the valley in 100 miles. It almost feels like a spell is cast on you coming up this path. I don't know, it's almost like it tears your past self away the further you go. That's not to mention the waterfall. It's really the most magical thing I've ever seen.
Well, I don't think we will be seeing much at this hour, Arthur, unless you have the eyes of a cat.
Well, Lena, I'm afraid these lanterns will suffice for us. Sometimes you can make up for one sense with another.
Is that right? I would have to agree. One can learn a lot with touch alone.
She replied in an insinuating tone. He rode up close and gave her a loving kiss on the forehead. This made her tingle from top to bottom. She felt her past worries ease at this. They rode onwards up the ridge. It seemed it would never end, and then it opened up. The trees parted, and that allowed the moon to light the scene. There was a pretty sizable lake in view. It seemed to be glistening surreally in the fresh fall air.
Es muy bonito. How on earth have I never been here?
Isn't it something? The Indians were really on to something with this spot.
The Cherokee? I really sympathize with them. It's a shame what has happened to them in these areas.
All along the Ocoee River is fantastic fishing. That's kind of why they settled here after being kicked out of the Carolinas. This in particular was a very special place to them. You can still find their traces up here, if you look hard enough.
I have read a few of your writings in the paper about them. It was very refreshing. People are still in denial about the situation, even after all this time.
I appreciate that you are particularly aware, Lena. That's very nice for a woman in these parts. He trailed off, and then added, "Really, I didn't mean to go on a rant about the Cherokee, but I've been trying to understand them and their relationship with this land for a long time. They were tapping into some things that these country folk are all but oblivious to. I keep ending up coming back here. Sometimes it just feels like this mountain is the best teacher there is."
So, do you talk as dirty to the mountains as you do to me?
She said with a smile wide enough to see with just the moonlight. They had dismounted at this point. He came around her flank and lifted her off the ground, spinning her around. "There are some similarities, Lena. The curves of your body, like the ridgelines. The peaks on your chest, like the rocks above the Hiawassee. The glimmer in your eye, like that of the first stint of sun across the horizon. But, unfortunately, I don't think they will fuck me, so that would just be a waste of time, wouldn't it?" They both erupted in laughter as he drew closer. He grabbed her soft cheeks with both hands, gave her a full kiss, and moved his hands down to the buttons on her blouse.
It's about time. I thought we'd never get there.
All things in due time, Lena. First, I'm jumping in that lake. I really don't intend to be the only one. They were in the water for a short while. She was coming in for a final kiss when a noise erupted in the distance. A look of shock washed over her face. It had sounded strange to her. She had heard lots of animal noises, but never anything like that. She knew it was nowhere near, but she was very startled for the first time this evening. These parts are notorious for black bears. Not sure why he's being so loud, but luckily that was in the opposite direction of where we are headed, he answered before she could say anything.
That was terrifying. I've heard people describe bear growls, but that sounded way stranger than I anticipated. Much higher pitch than I was expecting. We need to go.
Come on, dear. Let's get a jump on it. We'll put some distance between us and that thing. I built a sheltered lodge near the waterfall. I was hoping to take you there tonight. He reached out for her hand as they were wading their way to shore. She grabbed his hand and said,
Please, let's get going quickly. I didn't like that at all.
After some time trotting their horses at a fair speed, they slowed down to a walk.
Well, what an exciting night this has been. If you can top that, I will be surprised. I'm not gonna lie, I was terribly horrified. I have never been too fond of predators. How were you so unfazed, Arthur?
I've seen a lot of things, Lena. I'll spare you the details. He smirked at her, and then continued, realizing he was coming off pretentiously. In all seriousness, you sort of just get used to it out here. We have always been intimately involved in the cycle of life. Being so corralled into modernization, sometimes we forget. A bear's call in the night was just an alarm call for our ancestors. You're supposed to respond, of course, but stressing doesn't help much.
You keep referring to our ancestors, to the Indians. What is it exactly that you find so fascinating about them?
Well, I guess I am going to go on a rant about them, he said, laughing. People look at the Cherokee in either extreme, it seems. People think they were some perfect race of humanitarians and that they were in divine relationship with nature, or people see them as nothing but savages. What they fail to see is that they were both, and that duality is hard for people to want to accept. Not everything is evil or good, heaven or hell. The point is that you need both. Sometimes you need to carry the sword, while other times you must turn the other cheek. I have always strived to embody that balance. That's part of the reason why I was so ostracized growing up. I guess I just really never found any answers in the modern world.
Well, I think it's fair to say you are anything but ordinary. But I don't think that is a bad thing. I think you were, or maybe are still, misunderstood.
He stared at the ground, seemingly taken aback by this. I guess you could say I have some less popular opinions. The sound of the stream grew much louder. He halted his horse and dismounted, quickly walking over to her left flank. Madam, I do believe we are at our next stop, if you would so join me. She grabbed his shoulders and fell into his arms, dismounting the horse. A well of erotic excitement welled inside of her as he grabbed her hand and ushered her towards the sound of the water. As they walked closer to the waterfall, Arthur began taking her clothes off, one piece at a time, leaving a trail behind them as they made their way closer. She knew she wouldn't be able to find them until morning. By the time they were in front of the falls, they were both naked. The water gently splashed them both. The lanterns in the distance lit the scene ever so slightly.
Oh, wow. This is so majestic. Quesada es muy hermoso,
She said, mixing languages. He grabbed her curvy Latina body closer and whispered in her ear, You are in for a wild night, ma'am. The creature Henry was inhabiting was now around a shack in the middle of nowhere, it seemed. The only thing he could note was the sound of water nearby. He had trekked a strange way through the woods, the creature changing course randomly, seemingly getting directions from some unknown source. There were other ape creatures nearby now. He could not really make out their towering forms besides the dreadful, glowing red eyes. They were setting up some sort of rock formations around the shack. He could not tell the purpose, but it was extremely intentional. The creatures made random quiet grunts and screeches. Occasionally they would stop and stare at each other, and Henry would be forced to stare deep into a pair of those red eyes floating in space. He wondered if they were communicating on some level that he was unaware of. All he knew was there was no physical or verbal signs of any communication. The shack seemed like it was in a somewhat dire state, but there were signs of use. The apes had been clearing out towels and different items of clothing. He saw one dragging a larger, unidentifiable lump out of the back door. He was shocked to see them disposing of dead animal carcasses that were randomly littered about. They would put their hands over the leftover blood, and he noticed it seemed to be absorbed into their skin. Out of nowhere, all of the creatures froze, looked towards the shack, and raised their long, lanky arms above their heads. They collectively gave out the same sound, hoo hoo rah, and then ran off in opposing directions. He was grabbing her ass with one hand and the small of her waist with the other. He peered deep into her deep brown eyes. Well enough beating around the bush, do you say?
My body is yours for the taking, Sir Arthur,
she said, giving away her hidden deep Hispanic accent. He took her hand and led her back to the horses. She was surprised to see him lead her right past them. It's right over this hill. The horses will be fine for a bit. She had no problem with this. She was fully under his trance. She felt her true primal urges rising above all of her sexual repression from the last few years. Nothing would stop her from giving in to this moment. He led her up the hill, and the shack came into view. She got a glimpse at it in the distance. It wasn't in good shape, but it seemed structurally sound. He took her up the stairs. He opened the door. It creaked loudly, giving way to a very dark interior. A series of scents lofted into her awareness. Dampness, something akin to mildew, mixed with a few wild aromas of flowers and kerosene. He lit 2 lanterns on a table nearby, and the room flashed into view, casting wild shadows upon all the walls. She saw a large animal fur cast invitingly in the middle of the room. Her eyes wandered to the walls. She thought she saw different types of animal bones on the shelves. Some sort of wild drawings or symbols, she couldn't quite tell. She wondered if this had to do with his research. Sorry for the mess. I had no plans of bringing a beautiful young woman into my place of work, he said, interrupting her thoughts. She drew close, finally getting a good view of his body. The whole world disappeared around her gaze. He was absolutely gorgeous. He was tall, porcelain, and his shape was very toned. His muscles coated his frame as a painter would adorn a canvas. His smile was mysterious and serious, but mostly his hair is what stole her away the most. The flowing white hair spilled out and around his ponytail, a very different look from people around. You like what you see? I wish you could see your own beauty right now. You are the most beautiful jewel I have ever laid eyes on. Truly an exotic creature, he said as he picked her up and carried her into the middle of the room. She laid her lips on his, staring down at him, feeling everything disappear. She felt herself getting wet. She craved him inside of her. Oh, how he stalled. He took her into the middle of the room and laid her down gently. His body engulfed her as he began kissing her neck, slowly moving down her body, first her tits and then her stomach, leaving trails of saliva. Her whole body shook with pleasure. She grabbed his hair and screamed with pleasure when he got to his final destination. Henry was growing tired of standing silently in the woods with his hands raised above his head. It was very silent, yet he felt something was proceeding. He had at moments felt like his total awareness merged with the beings, temporarily dissolving his identity. He worried that he was losing his mind. He worried that if he didn't hold on, he would slip entirely. Then out of nowhere, he felt the creature become aroused. Yet strangely, the bloodlust remained. The ape creature began grunting under its breath, and then he looked up and was baffled at what he saw. He saw beams of light emanating out of the hands of the creature, being sent up into the sky mesmerizingly. He saw first insects, moths, and then bats began dancing in ecstasy around the beam. It parted way deep into the night sky. He noticed 3 other beams piercing the clouds, presumably from the other apes. And then slowly, the creature began walking forwards, back in the direction of the shack. His consciousness was fighting to hold on to sanity. He felt himself disappearing once again. She was now on top of him, thrusting her ass onto him, drowning him in her wetness. She was relishing in this, fully giving way to her hedonistic desires. Lena almost briefly thought that it might have gotten brighter outside. She almost began pondering this, but then his hands brought her back. His hands meandered up and down her body, and then found themselves on the rug, gripping it tightly, lost in pleasure. He moved his hand behind him and brought out a small blade. She began to grow afraid before he quickly flipped it around and brought it up towards her in a non-threatening manner. "I'm not going to harm you, Lena. This is where you gain your power back. You've been powerless for far too long. I want to set you free." She thought this over.
What are you offering, Arthur?
"I want you to channel all of your frustration into me, darling. Release it on me. That blade is not very sharp. You won't hurt me. He trailed off and then continued. "I actually won't mind it at all," he said, smiling. She didn't think long before grabbing the blade. This actually turned her on a lot. Was this man a masochist? She liked the idea. She thrust her hands onto him, pinning him down playfully, before raising the blade to her tongue, licking it end to end wildly. She then began sliding the blade down his body, creating very small trails of blood. She then locked her legs around him and flipped onto her back, causing his body to move in tandem. She pointed the blade directly at him before saying,
"Now, fuck me like you mean it, Arthur."
He obeyed. It was a few moments of the deepest pleasure she had ever felt when she could no longer ignore how bright it had become. The light pierced through the windows. And then, when she thought it couldn't get stranger, a large circle of light emerged on the ceiling. It almost looked like the roof was no longer there. She began to see images appearing there, small scenes moving jarringly across the light. She grew deeply afraid. It felt like time stilled, almost like this information was being injected into her mind. She saw this same shack in one of the images. Other women in the same room, pillars of light emanated from outside the shack. She saw them rise above the building, floating above the mountains far into the sky. She felt herself unable to move. Arthur had seemingly stopped moving, or perhaps time truly was standing still. Above her, the scene faded, and she saw an aerial view of Cleveland. She saw dark streams pouring across the countryside, painting the rural area sinisterly. Dark black ooze creeping its way down alleyways, into stores, pastures. As people were bathed in this liquid, their faces froze. Their eyes turned red. Some of them floated into the air, similarly to the women. That brought her mind back to the shack. She saw the scene revert. Her eyes followed the women upwards into the sky. They seemed to warp through a strange portal-like aberration suspended up in the air. She then saw strange altar-like beds coated in that same black ooze. She saw the women's legs and arms were being held down by this liquid. It seemed to be some sort of breeding room. But there was nothing else in the room. It seemed like the black ooze was doing something with their body. She could see it coursing through their veins. Her survival instinct kicked in full force. She forced herself back towards her body, trying to relive the scenes of the night, trying to force herself into the present. She began to feel her body once again, moving a finger at first, and then her full hand. She brought her awareness to the blade. She knew what she needed to do. She didn't hesitate. She snapped back into her body and flung the blade full force into Arthur's flank, once and then twice. She was startled to not feel him flinch an inch. She looked into his eyes and was startled to see him smiling at her. "Oh, you're going to have to try harder, darling." She shoved him to the side and he got himself up. They squared away. His hands were down, seemingly unthreatened. She navigated his body to his stab wounds and was terrified to see them healing, the blood drying, the rupture sealing shut.
What the hell are you?
She yelled at him violently. "I am many things, Lena. Like I said, I'm a bit strange. I am just looking to balance things out." Her fear began to grow intensely. She felt like she was completely trapped. Her body began to freeze as he started walking slowly towards her. "You see, the ancients were on to something. There are powers outside of us that want to work through us. You can see it in nature. The Indians knew this. All things seek balance. The bear must eat the deer must eat the grass. Viruses have the same will to survive as any advanced organism. We just think that we are all that matters, Lena." She felt her legs give way as she fell to her knees. She was truly cursed. Amongst this dreadful fear, she felt a series of emotions pierce her mind. She felt betrayed by God. She thought she was finally going to make her life better. She thought she finally had an escape. She began to sob deeply as he approached and placed his hands in her hair. She began to hear screams and grunts getting closer outside. Yes, it was the same sounds she had heard at the lakeside. She saw a pair of red eyes peering menacingly through one of the windows. She began weeping louder. "Come, my dear, don't be afraid. You have a very important role to play. You should feel honored." He was interrupted by her screaming wildly at first, and then there was a deep silence. He brought her head back to look at her. He saw blood streaming down her neck. Blood came out of her mouth. He heard the knife hit the ground right before her body did the same. Henry saw her body hit the floor from right outside the window. He was boiling in anger. His soul screamed into the abyss. He felt his heart being ripped into pieces. This poor soul, he watched as her blood seeped into the wooden floor. He felt the creature grow immensely angered as well. And then he saw the man inside lock eyes through the window. The man froze in place, similarly to the apes, and he began to become aware of his voice. I don't know what to say. I was working hard on that one. Her will was very strong. I'm sorry, I didn't expect that." The man stopped speaking for a minute and then continued. "Why are you talking about the stranger? I thought that was in the past. I have not grown weak. Yes, the blade was unnecessary. You're right. I'm sorry. Henry's vision began to blur and the scene grew distant. He felt like he was blacking out. He lost the ability to comprehend or process anything further. Everything faded. Chapter 4. Snap Back to Reality. He was in a dark room, lit only by a handful of lanterns on the back wall. Henry's last few memories were completely blank in this moment. He just had a strange, lingering fear deep in his soul. As he looked around, he saw the familiar barrels, the stockpiles. This was where the mill exported their furs. This was where carts would pull up and be loaded with barrels of furs and clothing. Nobody spent a lot of time down here. It was strictly for loading and unloading. Something about it had always left people with a strange feeling of being watched. He looked around, wondering if his mom was somewhere in here. He had a mixed feeling, a bit of dread of actually seeing her up close, but yet a longing for her embrace. He wondered if he would ever come out of this place. He felt his sanity slipping.
From the sheepskin to the clothing rack. I never fully understood that until now.
Susan said,
I want to see you, Mom. I know you are worried that I will be afraid, but please don't worry.
Henry proclaimed nervously. A sound of a barrel creaking moved his gaze to the back of the room. A dark figure hunched over emerged from behind the barrel. In the dim light, it was hard to make her out entirely. The same black ooze as he saw by the roadside and in Jamie's office was left in her trail. Henry felt a shudder travel down his spine. She stopped. He began to approach her.
Stop, Henry. We can't get any closer. I want to hug you so bad, my sweet boy, but I risk the consequences. That is why I've been so brief. You need to get out of here as soon as you can.
She replied. Henry kept his gaze. She seemed to be just a frame. All of her mass had deteriorated. He couldn't make out her face besides her beaming amber eyes.
What happened to you, Mom? I can't live with myself anymore without knowing.
Henry said, again fighting back all of the feelings he had repressed for so long.
Your father tried to bring me back, Henry. And he did. But in doing so, he brought back other things as well. I've tried so hard to keep these things from you. I just wanted you to live a normal life. I wanted you to see the countryside, to leave this town. I didn't want you to know about this.
She trailed off.
Things have changed. I can no longer keep you in the dark.
Henry thought about her words, realizing the weight. She had been trapped here, in this place, for over 10 years. He felt deep pangs of sadness for her.
Dad tried to bring you back to life? I was just a kid. He left me to myself, abandoned me. I couldn't forgive him.
Henry said.
I am ashamed that he left you as well. I had to try to forgive him. It has been hard. All this time, I've been worried about you being alone. He couldn't live with himself after what he did, Henry.
Susan replied.
I love you, Mom. Why are you in this place? What exactly did he do?
Henry replied.
He meddled with things that he didn't understand, things that I've had to try to understand being here. He didn't know what to do in my absence. He loved me more than the world. His world didn't exist without me.
Susan replied.
Does this have to do with the deaths that happened after you died? Dozens of children went missing, cows were torn apart. They blamed Dad for all of that.
He briefly paused at this before continuing.
I've seen things while I've been here. I'm starting to understand that these things actually happen.
Henry replied.
I'm so sorry you had to witness these things. I'm going to explain everything to you, son, because it is the only way you will get out of here. When the stranger and your father did that ritual, a being entered my body and used it as a host. I, in return, ended up here in the spirit realm. I was at peace for a while, and then I was cast here. I don't remember anything now. All I remember is waking up from here in this form. I know this is hard to hear, but the being that is in my body is trying to bring back other such beings, and it all revolves around this very location, the mill.
Susan said. Henry, having worked here since he was 14, began to get very uncomfortable. He had always wondered why this room, even the whole mill, made his skin crawl.
I don't want to leave you here, in this place, anyways. I can't take it.
Henry exclaimed.
Henry, Dr. Jamie is not the Jamie we once knew. He is infiltrated by the Ancient Ones, in the same way that many are. Their grasp is expanding on this town. He is injecting you with an ancient serum that will keep you in this place, until it's too late for your body to recover.
Henry didn't know what to say, but he knew something had been off about Jamie. Before he could respond, Susan went on.
You see, Henry, this is an ancient ritual ground, from long before. I realize that I might not have brought you up right. The universe is much older than I ever thought. There were many civilizations that came before, but not all of them were good. They refer to themselves as simply the Ancient Ones. There are many classes of these Ancient Ones, ranging from the horrid beasts that have devoured those cattle, up towards the creature that inhabits my body, all the way to the beings that are far more intelligent than any human. They were a wicked race, Henry. Their destruction was the best thing that could have happened for this planet. But now, they are back, and they want to once again take control. After the Ancient Ones were annihilated, their tombs were sealed, only accessible through a very specific ritual. Being that the mill was built on top of this site, the only way to charge enough energy would be by igniting it on fire, while simultaneously doing the ritual. It is extremely important that this does not ever happen.
She paused, almost looking like she was in pain. He was startled. Not only was he speaking to his mom once again, he was realizing that the world was older than 6,000 years and full of evil, long-forgotten races.
I don't know what to say to that, Mom. I just want to get you out of here. I can't take this anymore. Is there anything I can do?
Henry said, on the verge of yelling.
Son, I've already moved on. I will not be able to come back. To the world, or my body, that is.
She replied. Henry felt another pang of sadness and a deep desire to hug her despite her distorted, oozing form.
I understand.
He trailed off, realizing how grateful he was to be speaking to her at all, realizing how he had just pushed her memory back in his mind all this time.
But I mean, this place? Surely this isn't everyone's destiny. There has to be a way to get you out of this fucking place.
He finished.
This is where you need to listen to me very carefully, son, because I love you, and this is of vital importance. I had to make a deal with the Ancient Ones in order to get you back home. I had to agree to tell you all of this in order for you to be free to go. There is one more thing I have to tell you.
She tried not to cry. She mustered her strength and continued.
There is a way I can be released from this realm, but only by completing the ritual. But do not...
Without being able to leave with another word, Henry began being haled backwards through the mill wall and across town. He saw his mother's long nails reaching out for him, and those amber eyes peering desperately, somberly at him.
It's seeping through the streets. It's coursing its way into everyone. The cycle just repeats. Generational curses, they are here to stay. It's time to get up and get them out of the way. Oh. It's the same place that we've been before, and it's the same cycle taking over once more. We're given a blueprint for manipulation. The architecture of trauma is just passed down with every lie it spreads. like a sickness, like a sickness in our souls. It takes me down. Generational concepts in my blood. It's in my DNA. It tells me what to do and what to say. We take it out. Try to fight fire with more fire, and just ends up getting burnt out. It's clear you've got to set your boundaries. Protect your energy. Protect your energy. Family is not just blood. And if the cells are infected, your heart